Hello there, everybody. And today, for my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 80s review, I'm at Season 3, Part 3 of my reviews. So, next week will probably be my last review of Season 3, since, like I said, there are a lot of episodes. But, I'm excited to talk about these episodes for sure. There's a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any time. So, disclaimer. Sorry if I don't remember everything that goes on in these episodes, since, like I said, there's so many. So if my memory is fuzzy about certain plot lines of this show, I apologize. But, episode, I think 25, is corporates from, Raiders from Dimension X. So, this is an episode where we see the return of Casey Jones. After the Turtles start to see a bunch of businessmen start to act suspicious lately in the city, and so they get Casey Jones to dress up for a job interview, and he has to go in there and find out what's going on with the various white-collar crimes that have been going on. We even see the Turtles put on some suits, which I thought was nice touch, since I think that suits them when they tried to get in, but it didn't work out. So they gotta get Casey Jones. Even the way they have to find him was funny, because Casey, of course, is crazy in this show. He just thinks anything that goes on is a crime. But once he does go to the job interview, it's actually interesting, because he's wearing his hockey mask still, even in a job interview. And I think it's funny the way he gets the job. He just starts acting crazy, frightening the interviewer. He just pulls out a bat, and then boom, he automatically gets the job. Kind of like in Ted. Weird comparison, I know. But once Casey does get the job, it turns out the various white-collar people, the reason why they're committing these various crimes is because they're under hypnosis by some program that is programming them to basically commit various crimes. And we actually find out who's behind all this. And Casey ends up almost getting controlled until the Turtles show up and free him from the control. And the five of them are able to team up and find out who's behind this. And of course, it's Shredder, who is trying to do all this so he can find a way to raise the Technodrome. But I honestly thought Shredder wasn't going to be in this episode, but turns out he is. He was the dude all along. But of course, the Turtles are able to stop him, of course, with the help of Casey Jones. And this isn't the last time we see Casey Jones in this show. But this episode was definitely memorable for his appearance. This is probably one of my favorite of the Casey Jones episodes. I just love how he had to go undercover as a businessman, even though he barely could handle the job interview. So, this episode was definitely nice, for sure. The next episode is Pizza by Shred. So, this is where Shredder tries to start his own pizza business. But we get a lot of coincidences in this episode, where Mikey ends up finding out that Shredder is looking for a delivery driver. But, of course, Mikey doesn't have a car, so he has to use the Neutrinos' car, because the Turtles won't let him use the Turtle Van, because Mikey's actually trying to find I forget what he's trying to look for, but he's trying to buy something, but the Turtles don't let him, because, I don't know, they just don't want him to. But Mikey decides that he must get a job. And then the Turtles say, being a Ninja Turtle is a full-time job, but Mikey just goes along with it. He puts on the human disguise, and he ends up going to the Pizza by Shred after seeing the commercial. And I even like how the number of the pizza place is 555/yuck, since it's meant to be weird pizza. And of course, once Mikey gets there, he first thinks the hands in the commercial were familiar, and even the voice, when he does go up to the pizza place. And of course, once we do find out it's Shredder, he's trying to find a way to get to the Turtles' lair through the weird pizza. And so Mikey takes the job, and he decides to steal the Neutrinos' car, and even Donnie was even working on it the whole time. But once Mikey does take it, the whole episode's just him trying to take the job of being a pizza delivery driver. It honestly suits Mikey to be a pizza delivery driver since, he's a big fan of pizza. And it makes sense that this is a job he would have if he wasn't a Ninja Turtle. But during all this, the Turtles end up trying to go look for the Neutrinos' ride. And of course, they decide to find a way to get a pizza. But they don't realize it's Shredder the whole time. That they even think his voice sounds familiar. And we get this running joke of Shredder sounding familiar to the Turtles when they see him on the TV and the phone. But Mikey ends up delivering to April, and it leads to the two to team up to find the Turtles after Shredder almost finds his way of finding the lair. And yeah, this episode is definitely an interesting one. I like the weird pizza, and just the pizza just looks so gross. Even Shredder trying to own a pizza shop was hilarious. But yeah, this episode was definitely good for sure. But the next episode I'm definitely excited to talk about. It is Super Bebop and Mighty Rocksteady. So this is where Shredder tries to use this mind control device, and he gives it to Bebop and Rocksteady to climb the Channel 6 tower, and it's during a lightning storm. They end up putting it on the signal, and during a news broadcast, it causes the entire news team to be mind-controlled and start saying, "You command, I obey." I even thought it was funny when the news anchor dude was like, the way his voice was funny, just the way he was saying, "You command, I obey." But the Turtles start to suspect Shredder's behind this, and so they decide to go investigate. But there's a catch with this whole mind control device thing. It can only work on humans, not mutants, which is a weird way to make a device. They could use it perfectly on the Turtles, but they decide not to. But because of Bebop and Rocksteady's failure, because the Turtles end up showing up and stopping Bebop and Rocksteady, and once they get back to the Technodrome, Krang decides to replace Bebop and Rocksteady with a robot version of them, where we see them as robots, and the only thing they can say is "stop Turtles," and they end up going to Channel 6, and they're going to use the device again, but this time it causes the news team to act like children, and even the Turtles are wondering why Shredder wants to turn everyone into a child. And it's funny just seeing Bern Thompson saying, "I want to watch cartoons," or Irma, April roller skating, or the other ones just acting like children and saying "hot potato" or whatever. And the Turtles end up finding the Super Bebop and Rocksteady, but of course they almost get smashed by them because they're so tough. But the device Shredder's using is also meant to... It gets malfunction later in the episode where it causes all the news people to start acting like animals. And even Shredder has to use a necklace to find his way. But once the Turtles do figure out what this necklace is for, they decide to take it off of him. And Shredder starts acting like a gorilla. It's funny. This episode is just hilarious. But of course, the episode is about Super Bebop and Rocksteady. And the designs actually look pretty cool. I actually do like the silver line of Bebop and Rocksteady. And even their voices were funny as robots. They even made NECA toys for these versions of the duo. I thought that was super cool. Since NECA toys are expensive. So I don't know, if you have any, comment it below. But of course the Turtles are able to stop Super Bebop and Rocksteady per usual and stop the device that Shredder's using. And yeah, this episode is definitely a lot of fun for sure. But the next episode is definitely an interesting one. This is the closest thing we have to Karai in this show. So if you don't know Karai, she's basically either the granddaughter of Shredder or the daughter, but if you don't know the 2012 show storyline, it's revealed Splinter's the father. But in this show, we have a character named Lotus, and she's definitely an interesting character for sure. I wish this show did have Karai, but I guess we have Lotus, and she is the love interest for Leonardo. She's basically hired by Shredder and Krang to basically take down the turtles, and this time she leads the mission with Bebop and Rocksteady. But she ends up finding the turtles' lair, and it leads to a fight between Leo and Lotus. And because Leo can't stop falling in love, he decides to fall back. And even Lotus gets overwhelmed by the fight. The two decide to stop fighting, and that's where Leo starts to fall in love. But of course, every time Lotus leaves the mission, she leaves like a lotus blossom flower, and Leo starts to even daydream her. So, interesting dynamic. We even learned a little bit of her backstory, where she grew up in Japan and she was basically the top student of Japan. But yeah, this episode's definitely a lot of fun, since I actually do like Lotus's personality. I wish we could have gotten more of her in this show. We did see her the next season, but of course, I do like at the end of the episode when they do stop Shredder and his plans. Lotus decides to have a change of heart. She decides to deliver a pizza, impersonate a pizza delivery man or woman, and decides to give the turtles their pizza. And instead of being a regular pizza, it's more of a Japanese kind of themed pizza. I liked how Lotus said she hopes to see Leo again. So it ends on a high note for Leonardo, at least, since he did meet his match in this episode. So Beware of Lotus is definitely a fun episode for sure. But the next episode, I forget, it's A Blast from the Past. So yeah, this episode ain't too much that goes on. This is where Shredder tries to recruit like a ancient sensei from their past, and they decide to have Bebop and Rocksteady be like the servants, and they basically become like ninja warriors. But during the fight, the Splinter decided to come when the turtles show up at the museum with the help of April, and Splinter gets hit with amnesia in this episode. And this episode's basically just kind of, I wouldn't say a bottle episode, it's just kind of a recycling other episodes where Splinter has no memories of who he is, and the turtles just recap everything that's been going on throughout the whole show. We see how they were born, what went down with Shredder, and the Technodrome, Krang, Bebop and Rocksteady, and how they met April. So, yeah, but Splinter, of course, gets his memories back, and they're able to stop Shredder, Bebop, and Rocksteady as ninja warriors. But I did like their ninja outfits. I feel like it suited Bebop and Rocksteady. It would have been interesting if they did become a ninja duo. But yeah, this episode's fine. It's just a bottle episode, sort of. It's just kind of just recapping other episodes. Honestly, we've seen this storyline before with Amnesia. It was alright. But the next episode I'm definitely excited to talk about. It's called Letterhead, the Terror of the Swamp. So this is the first appearance of Letterhead in this show, and he actually has an origin. So in the Mirage comics, Letterhead was a sewer that was dropped in the sewer, and then he got mutated through experimentation. But in this version, Letterhead was born in Florida, and because Krang dumped mutagen in that water, it caused Letterhead to mutate and chase after a boy and his dad who were trying to hunt Letterhead, the alligator. But somehow Letterhead's able to get the man's clothes for some reason. But we also see the return of the punk frogs. But because the turtles were looking at an old memory book of the punk frogs, they were wondering what they were up to. But the punk frogs are in trouble because of Letterhead. I'm surprised they made Letterhead a villain in this show, because usually Letterhead's an ally of the Ninja Turtles. But in this version, he's just a straight up villain. I was thinking they were probably just trying to sell more toys by creating a newer character, that being Leatherhead. But Leatherhead's got that accent of his. I forget what kind of accent he's got. But I think he's played by Jim Cummins. So I like Jim Cummins. He's a great voice actor. And he voices Leatherhead pretty well. And he says, "You can't escape no Leatherhead." But of course, Shredder's going to be in this episode. He decides to come to Florida to find a way to recruit Leatherhead to have him join them on their mission against the Turtles. But the Turtles decide to go to Florida after one of the Punk Frogs contacts them. And so they decide to go to Florida, and they decide to ask April and Irma to help out. But of course, Irma rejects, and April comes along. But once they do get to the swampy area, they get captured by Leatherhead, but they are saved by one of the frogs. But of course, they have to use Leatherhead as a captured. They capture him, and but once they do, the way Leatherhead escapes, the Turtles and April end up getting tricked into falling into quicksand, and once Shredder shows up, he is just ready for the Turtles, and he decides to let them sink. But of course, one of the frogs has a whip, and he's able to save all of them at the last second. But the one thing that definitely is infamous about this episode is where there's this secret fountain of youth that's in the water of Florida. This is where this water can turn any being, even mutants, into basically de-age them. And Mikey ends up falling into the water, and of course, he becomes a little bit younger, and even Donnie decides to check out the water for himself, and April decides she wants to jump in, but of course, they tell her no, because they don't know what it can do to humans. And once Shredder sees the water, he's like, "Ooh, I should drink out of it." And Leatherhead's like, "Oh, no, that water is no for drinking. It can do voodoo magic." And I thought that line was hilarious, and even Shredder thinks it's ridiculous. But once they bump into the Turtles and the Punk Frogs, one of the frogs ends up throwing like a smoke grenade, and it causes Shredder to fall into the water, and he becomes a baby. That was hilarious, seeing Shredder whine like a baby. But the big thing that happens in this episode is that we don't even know how Shredder came back to being an adult. He's like, "Oh, don't just stand there, you morons." And of course, Bebop and Rocksteady, of course, rescue Shredder, and they go back to the Technodrome. And even Krang makes fun of Shredder for turning into a baby. Oh, but of course, Leatherhead just runs away, and we would see him again this season. But Leatherhead Terror of the Swamp was definitely one of the highlight episodes for sure. Easily one of the best of this show. So next is Michelangelo's birthday. So Michelangelo's birthday was definitely a memorable episode. This is where Mikey ends up running away from home because he thinks the Turtles have forgotten his birthday. But of course, they're just messing around with him because they actually didn't forget his birthday. But once Mikey does run away, he decides to go out on his own for a little bit. But Shredder has a plan, of course. He's going to use some device on the Turtles that will finish them off for good. But once the Turtles end up figuring out what Mikey's up to, they decide to go look for him once Splinter finds the note. And so they're going to find Mikey and bring him home for his birthday. But Shredder decides to go look for Mikey. But he ends up kidnapping Mikey with Bebop and Rocksteady. And they decide to tie him up. And even Bebop and Rocksteady even sing about it, that we got ourselves a turtle. But once Shredder shows up, he decides to dump some acid on Mikey that will slowly basically disintegrate him. And so Shredder decides to confront the Turtles themselves and Splinter. And wait, no, not Splinter. He decides to go look for Mikey himself. But It's even wilder seeing the Shredder tag along with the turtles. But once they get to the warehouse where Mikey is, it appears Mikey has been melted apart. But it turns out he didn't. He actually escaped, of course. And this is where we get one of the weirder moments in this episode. Shredder ends up using the device he's been trying to use on the turtles, and they end up turning into a balloon? Okay, so this moment was definitely weird. It's just, I don't know, it could be seen as like an inflation fetish. Honestly, that could have been the intention of the writers or animators, but they just look... Seeing Leo, Raph, and Donnie as balloons just felt so weird. But once Splinter shows up with Mikey, when he does find him, they end up using like these crystal ball things to turn the turtles back. And of course they're able to find, I think Shredder basically escapes, but of course they're able to celebrate Mikey's birthday with April. And even April gives Mikey a kiss, which was nice. But Michelangelo's birthday was definitely the weirder episodes of this show, but it was definitely a lot of fun for sure. But the next episode is a crossover episode. This is where we see the debut of Usagi Yojimbo. So if you don't know who Usagi is, he was basically a comic book character who was this rabbit samurai. But he once had a crossover with the Mirage Turtles, and he had the longest battle with Leonardo in that comic. So I don't know if you checked that comic out. I'd definitely like to check it out one day. I even have a Ninja Turtles Usagi crossover comic. But this is the first crossover with Usagi. This is where the Turtles decide to test out the dimensional portal, and they start to see various random dimensions until they randomly see Usagi's dimension. And once he comes out of the portal, he decides to battle the turtles, thinking they're a threat. And he even battles Leonardo. And he even says his swordsmanship is excellent. But Usagi's voice, I was expecting like a more deeper voice, like in the 2012 version. But no, we have more of a soft-spoken voice. Since he is voiced by Talman Coleman, which was nice. But Usagi's design actually looks super cool. I do like Usagi a lot. This is probably my favorite. Well, probably my second favorite. I do like the 2012 one. Even the 2003 one. But it's wild that each Ninja Turtle cartoon has had Usagi. Except for the Rise version and the current Mutant Mayhem Turtles. But the Turtles decide to team up with Usagi after Shredder has some plan in some Japan museum where he's going to unleash some gigantic dragon after trying to kidnap the dude who's running the place. And Shredder's going to use some scroll to unleash some dragon. But of course, Usagi... the best thing about this episode is Usagi is very confused about human culture. He even has to wear a disguise, and even Irma sees Usagi and says, like, who's your friend? But of course, Usagi can't really interact with the humans. But the best scene in this episode is where Usagi ends up finding, like, a rabbit store restaurant, and he thinks all the people who are dressed as rabbits are being forced to be slaves of the place. And it's kind of a reflection of how workers are treated at restaurants, and Usagi ends up pulling his sword out and stopping the manager and even strips him in his underwear. I thought that scene was hilarious. But it all leads to a battle between a giant dragon, the Turtles, and Usagi, and of course they're able to stop the dragon. I forget how, but Usagi's honored at the Palace Museum, and the man who runs the place ends up recruiting Usagi to help him out in the museum. But this episode was definitely a good crossover with Usagi, since he's a fun character for sure. They even made a toy of him for the toy line. So I don't know if any of you people have it. If you do, definitely tell below. So that's a good Usagi episode. But the next episode is easily probably my favorite episode of this show. It is The Case of the Hot Komodo. So I'm going to take a breather. Whew. So this episode is where we get the proper debut of probably my favorite villain of this show, Dawn Turtelli. So this episode's more about April's aunt. She's interviewing her Aunt Aggie, also known as Agatha Marbles, clearly a parody of Agatha Christie's novels at the time. And she's known as the world's greatest crime solver. She's even able to solve who spilled a banana peel, and it's revealed to be Venom, of course. But Aunt Aggie, of course, suspects April knows the Ninja Turtles, and she wants to meet them. And April's like, how do you know I know the Turtles? And of course, she's able to just figure things out. And I like how Aunt Aggie's personality. She's able to just figure things out with clues, and she could just spot it. She's just spot on in this episode. But the main villain of this is Don Turtelli. He's basically trying to kidnap various kimonos. He's he's sending his goons to rob various kimono stores and steal all the kimonos. And when Leo and Mikey show up to pick up Master Splinter's kimono, they end up stealing his, but they end up dropping all of them except for Splinter's when they were throwing pizzas at them. But once they do go to Splinter, they tell him that they got the unfortunate news, and so they decide to go investigate who's behind these various crimes. But once we do meet Don Turtelli, he's a mobster with a mustache. He's got a feather. He's just over the top. But once April decides to go investigate herself about these kimono crime waves, it catches Don Turtelli's attention. And so he sends his goons to go after April, and he kidnaps both of them. And so the Turtles team up with Aunt Aggie, and they decide to go find out what happened to her. But during this, April and Venom are captured by Don Turtelli, and of course he pulls out his infamous feather and says, "Ooh, pay the penalty, or if you don't tell me all you know about kimonos." And he ends up tickling April's foot with a feather. Honestly, this could be seen as like a fetish, like a foot fetish. I don't know if that was the writer's intention, honestly, but I feel like if this episode came out today, it would totally be viewed as a fetish. But Dawn is infamous for tickling April's foot, and now people want to know Renee Jacobs' reaction to this episode. So yeah, it's a weird story, I know. But this episode's definitely funny for this foot moment. But he ends up tickling Venom a lot more. And he ends up laughing hysterically. They even reference the Goonies randomly when he gives up, saying, "Oh, I cheated on an English test," and later I cheated on my income tax. That's what Venom says. But the Turtles end up finding clues in the warehouse April was kidnapped at, and of course they're gonna try to find April. And this is where Aunt Aggie decides to come up with a scheme where she's going to have Donnie do a commercial of Kimono Cow. And he's dressed as Kimono Cow, and it catches the goons' attention and Don Turtelli, and they send his goons after Donnie. And they end up picking up the kimonos with the Turtles in the crate thing. But of course, April and Venom try to escape the building, but this is where they jump on the ledge when the Turtles do show up, and they try to stop Don in his crimes. But April and Venom almost fall off the building. Of course, they're saved by a random, they get their fall stopped by this giant hotel platform thing, because I think the whole Don Turtelli building is in some gigantic building that he owns. But of course, the Turtles, April and Aggie end up discovering where Don's location is. He's on some yacht where he is going to steal Splinter's Komodo and use it to find some hidden treasure. But once Don does get away, the Turtles are able to stop his goons, And when Don escapes on the yacht, one of the jet skis, they end up stopping him, of course. And it's revealed that Don's been trying to use Splinter's kimono just so he can find some buried treasure. But Aunt Aggie ends up revealing that she found the treasure years ago, and it disappoints Don, of course. But the case of the hot kimono ends with the turtles telling Aunt Aggie she doesn't have a clue about making pizza when she tries to make pizza. But the case of the hot kimono was definitely an interesting episode with the debut of Don Turtelli. I know he appeared in Burns Blue, but he looked a lot different in that episode. But this appearance is definitely infamous. He's become quite the deep cut of the Ninja Turtles lore, and he's easily one of my favorite villains. I mean, my favorite villain is Shredder, of course. But Don, you're definitely on the list for sure. Ooh. But the next episode is Usagi Come Home. So this episode is the last episode of Usagi, another Usagi crossover. But this is where Usagi is tricked by Shredder. After getting into a fight with him, he ends up using a magnet on Usagi, causing him to lose his sword. And because of this, Usagi decides he is forced to go after the turtles in a fight because he lost. He's forced to fight the turtles, and he decides to go confront them in the sewer, and the turtles are surprised to see him. But Usagi ends up pulling his sword out, and the whole episode's them trying to chase Usagi around like a mall, and Usagi ends up even jumping on like an escalator, and he doesn't know how it works, but he jams his sword in there, and Usagi escapes. But Mikey, of course, uses like a TV to distract Usagi. But I do like the Turtles versus Usagi. It shows that Usagi was naive. He was tricked easily into attacking the turtles. But one of the more wild things about this episode is they were not able to find Usagi's home. Donnie ends up trying to find it, but because there's so many dimensions, he felt he just can't find Usagi's. And Usagi ended up not even coming home in his dimension in this episode. He decides to stay behind when he does realize he was tricked this whole time. But of course, they're able to team up and fight Shredder and stop him from using his magnet ray for whatever he was trying to use on Usagi. But this episode was definitely interesting for sure. I like Usagi. It's disappointing we couldn't see him in the rest of the show. But he did return in the 2003 show, which I will talk about in the future of my channel. So, Usagi Come Home, good one for sure. The next episode, I'm kind of going over these episodes quickly since my voice is getting tired. But this is the making of Metalhead. So, Metalhead is always been part of the Ninja Turtles lore. He didn't return until the 2012 show. But Metalhead's basically a robot version of the Turtles. But I'm surprised he wasn't made by the Turtles in this incarnation. Instead, he was made by Krang, who's going to use the robot to go after the turtles. But the thing is about the turtles in this episode, they are sick. They have the turtle pox, and April is taking care of them. And of course, they start acting like babies, whining about wanting chicken noodle soup, a blanket, and April calls them babies. But once Shredder and Bebop and Rocksteady are causing some chaos, the turtles decide to leave the lair. They're forced to, and they're basically forced to fight Bebop and Rocksteady even though they're sick, and of course, it doesn't really go well. But they all escape, and then the turtles go back to being sick until Metalhead shows up in the lair, and he ends up kidnapping every one of them, Splinter, April, and the turtles. But with Donnie's help, he's able to outsmart Metalhead, and he's able to basically reprogram him. And we get this infamous scene where Metalhead's reprogrammed and he tries to talk to the turtles, and he says, "Take me to your leader." And he ends up switching voices, thinking he's Leo, Mikey, Raph, Donnie, and even April calls him a schizophrenic robot. But the turtles want to use Metalhead to find a way to track Shredder down, and it all leads to like a finale where they go on some bridge, and the turtles have to do their best to stop Shredder with the help of Metalhead. But I even like at the end of the episode where April's able to go back to Channel 6 and Metalhead basically becomes the new nurse and it has April's voice. I thought that scene was funny. But the making of Metalhead was definitely an interesting episode. I do like Metalhead a lot as a character. I like how he's just basically a nurse robot or a ninja droid. I do like the 2012 version a lot more, but I definitely think that episode of the 2012 show took inspiration from this episode for sure. But the next episode is the last one I'm going to talk about until I do my part 4 of this review. Wait, no. Yeah, part 4. This is where it's called Letterhead Meets the Rat King. So this is another episode where we don't see Shredder, Krang, or Bebop and Rocksteady. We instead see cardboard cutouts. But the turtles are busy doing some training exercises. But during all this, Letterhead has returned to New York City. From Florida to New York. He ends up sneaking into a cargo truck. And he ends up scaring the man who's driving. But of course, Letterhead's going to go try to find the turtles after getting word that they're in the sewer. He ends up trying to go find them, but instead, he gets kidnapped by the Rat King. And this is a weird pair, like Letterhead and the Rat King. I don't know what the two have in common, but they decided to team the two up. But April, Vernon, and Irma are sent down to the sewer to go get some crazy scoop in the sewer. But the turtles are too busy training, of course, and they're forced to team up. Turtle to Turtle, where Raph teams up with Mikey, Leo teams up with Donnie, and they're going to have some strategy to see who wins the mountain. And they play like King of the Mountain. Splinter suggests it basically, and the first Raph and Mikey end up losing until Mikey notices that Donnie's using some cannon that basically destroys his pizza while he's eating it. He even orders it while they're training, but Mikey ends up saying, "This destruction of food must end," and he pulls out his nunchuck and he ends up taking out the machine, and he wins. King of the Mountain. But during all this, Vernon, April end up, and Irma find the Rat King, and he throws a smoke bomb at them, causing April to escape. But this is where she bumps into Letterhead, who has managed to escape, and the Rat King ends up kidnapping Irma and Vernon. He would kidnap them later in season 4 where they become the were-rats. But instead, they're put to a truck that is going to basically cause them to become zombies. And the Rat Kings end up using like some special mutagen for it. But once April decides to contact the turtles, Letterhead picks up the phone and he ends up telling them to come back to the sewer. And this is where the turtles end up going back to the sewer. And they do find Letterhead and the Rat King. And I do like the scene where Letterhead and Rat King decide to fight each other by throwing various bazookas at each other and grenades. And Vernon tries to record this once he is rescued by the turtles in April. They end up throwing water in his face to get unhypnotized. But Vernon thinks he is captured all the moment, saying he's the star reporter. But Raph says, "Oh, you forgot to take the cap off." And of course, Vernon is disappointed. I thought that scene was funny. But the Rat King ends up escaping, and Letterhead escapes in this underwater. Wait, no, not underwater. He ends up escaping in the water when he falls out of the sewer, and he says, "I'm going back to Florida." But that's part 3 of these series of episodes. So these are probably some of my favorite episodes. I think these were the most memorable episodes. It has newer characters, which I like. I like Letterhead, Don Tertelli, and the bizarre plots of Shredder trying to do various bad things to the Turtles. Yeah, and even Casey Jones's return was nice. So definitely check out these episodes for sure. I'm going to review part 4, and then I'm probably going to take a little break from reviewing this show. So I do it this once a month. So we shall wait and see. So anyway, thanks for watching, and Turtle